Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Firestorm's Crisis Coach 2018 webinar series. Today we are going to be talking about when something is not enough, how to prevent violence from entering your doors. We have a somewhat joint session today. We had a school session earlier today. This is our business focus session. Many schools joining us who are unable to make that earlier session, so we welcome everyone. Please do connect with us on social media. We are Firestorm Soul on Twitter, Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. We are your continuity experts on YouTube, and we are Firestorm Solutions on LinkedIn. We share some great information on all of our solutions and our system to value by responding to some of the most in the country. We come with proven crisis management expertise, and you can always learn more about us at firestorm.com, and we appreciate your continued support. I'd also like to mention we appreciate the continued support of many of our participating sponsor organizations, such as the Virginia Association of Independent Schools, Georgia Association of Independent Schools, Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, the Georgia Independent Schools Association, University of Alabama, and several business organizations. Today we're going to have Harry Rulin, and we're very glad he developed for Firestorm. Harry is the president of our parent company, Novum, and the co-founder and former CEO of Firestorm. Harry is also co-author of the book Disaster Ready People for a Disaster Ready America with Jim Satterfield and Susie Laughlin. And that's available as a no-fee ebook from our website. And what we're going to speak about today is something called Share the Formula. And what we want to talk about today is Harry's basic premise and belief, and our belief, that the key to change is in implementing a true process for identifying those on a path to violence and intervention before the weapon, and it's not necessarily always a gun, but before the weapon comes into a school. So in May of this year, Harry and our parent company Novum brought together a very prestigious panel to talk about this very issue. Our roundtable participants included the Albert family. It was a family directly affected by the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. We had Dr. Jeff Jackson there. He was representing Georgia Independent School to remember that schools are workplaces as well. So we're not only protecting students in schools, but we're protecting our employees. Just as in the workplace, we may be protecting visitors, vendors, and other people on our property. We also had Susie Laughlin, who is a co-architect of our Bertha program and the former Chief Administrative Officer for Firestorm. Brenda Truelove from the University of Alabama. We have a great program with our Bertha integration there where the training is hosted via the University of Alabama. We had artificial intelligence representatives there, Hart Brown, COO of Firestorm. And the panel was moderated by former ABC News White House correspondent Ann Compton. And for an hour, we talked about something called the formula. And the formula has 9 components. And Harry is going to talk to us today about how we not only share the formula, and what you're seeing in front of you are some examples of grassroots efforts of people sharing this 9-point formula, but also how you can implement the formula in your work or school place today. So with that, we're going to look at some information we asked you when you first joined our session. We collect this information in the aggregate. And Harry, you want to interpret the data as we see it and talk a little bit about the 9 components for us today?
Sure. I don't know if I don't know that I want to interpret the data, but I want to tell everybody that I'm surprised by the data and intrigued. I want to learn more about it because the first one where it says my organization prevented an act of violence from occurring in the last 365 days, I was surprised by the large number that said yes. I would love to get together with some of you and understand what kind of events did you have at your organization? What did you prevent and how? Because that's very valuable information to us at Firestorm to help others so that they can similarly prevent violent events. And again, the 41% yes in the next two columns, you know, my organization has a system in place, and my organization has updated their violence prevention program. I think that the amount of media that surrounded the Parkland event did in fact encourage a lot of organizations, especially in the education space, to look at their violence prevention programs and update them, and to make sure they had some kind of a system in place. So I'm less surprised by those numbers, although still a fairly high percentage compared to what we're used to. So we'll be reaching out to you guys, and I hope you can share with us as much information as you can, because again, it's going to be very helpful in understanding. Now, one of the things I'm also very curious to understand, you know, when people say that my organization has a system in place that identifies and organizes behaviors of concern, you know, one of the things we always hear from organizations is we have something. And the point we're trying to get across to everybody is that something is not enough. What you're going to see when we lay out what the formula is, and when you look at it, it seems pretty much like common sense. The things that are in there, there's nothing that you're going to go, oh, I never thought of that. But what you're going to realize is that you need every piece, that they interact with one another and they create a net. And without look at this not only school, whatever it might be, but also look at it as a parent, look at it as a community member, and say to yourself, okay, I need to go to my employer, to my school board, and say, look, here is a best practices formula. Tell me why what we're doing is better, or tell me why we're not doing this. And that's the whole concept behind Share the Formula. So one of the things we did when we created Share the Formula was create a website separate and apart from Firestorm. We don't want people to think that in any way they have to interact with Firestorm or pay for anything. We want them to understand what are the things that need to be done in order to ensure the safety of our employees and our children, and push to make those things happen. So a lot of times I get asked the question, well, why are we having this discussion? Why are we here? And what I explain to folks around the country is that there are people that I refer to as sitting on the fence. These are individuals who have issues for one reason or another, whether they've got problems in their home, which could be drugs, alcohol, mental illness, any kind of thing, individuals that themselves have mental illness, people who have spousal problems, financial problems, whatever those things are that make them more susceptible to perpetrating an act of violence than they might otherwise be. And again, most of them sit on that fence forever. They never come off because there's a societal resistance to violence. But a certain number of them get pushed off the fence every year. And a lot of them get pushed off during times of high visibility for these kind of events. So following the shootings in Parkland, we saw a lot of what we call copycat events. And copycat doesn't mean that you necessarily copy the event. In other words, that you do it exactly the same. But it means that your event was precipitated by what happened and what you saw. And the people who are sitting on the fence are much more susceptible to that type of thing. So as technology continues to increase the amount of information that people get, and the fact that you're always connected now, you've always got a cell phone and a computer and a television and all these other things, these people are getting pushed off the fence more and more. So I think the important thing that everybody needs to remember, I don't care how big your organization is or how small it is, there are people in your organization that are sitting on the fence. So one of the things we hear all the time from school administrators, from C-suites, from boards, oh, we know our people, we know our families. Well, the reality is, no, you don't. You don't know what they've been through recently. You don't know what the exposures are that they've got outside of work. And there's somewhere between 10 and 20% of people in most organizations who have some situation like drug or alcohol abuse themselves, or within their family, and other types of things, financial problems. And those people, again, are, that's not saying they're going to do anything, but they're more susceptible. And so the question is, what can we do? How can we identify them? How can we get them the help that they need before, and I mean long before, they feel the need to act out in the workplace or bring a gun to school? So I was the person who took the call from Dr. Charles Steger when he called about the shootings at Virginia Tech. And Firestorm responded to those events. And since then, which was 11 years ago now, we've been developing this information. We've responded to hundreds of school incidents and workplace incidents. And over that time, what we've built is a system for understanding why they happen, how they happen, and how we can prevent them from happening. So what you'll see when you go to either the Firestorm website and you go on the formula portion, or if you go to sharetheformula.com, you'll see this very simple 9 steps. And the first one is awareness training. I think I'll get into this a little more as we go on, but making it so that your people understand what it is they're supposed to be looking for and what it is then they're supposed to do with it. The next piece then, of course, is anonymous reporting. What we found is if there's no way for people to report things anonymously, they probably won't. Because the kind of thing that we're asking employees and students and others to report are not necessarily the kind of thing that someone would report. So anyone's going to report, hey, Johnny's out in the parking lot with a gun. No problem. That's easy for everybody. But when Mary comes to school with a black eye and says, oh, I got in a fight with my father last night, that's not necessarily the kind of thing that's going to get reported, because most people try to stay out of personal business. The problem is when you know that there's situations like that, especially in the workplace, if you know that there's a woman who reports having had issues with a boyfriend or a spouse, that is usually the number 1 or number 2 leading cause, depending on the year, of death for females in the workplace. So people, usually almost always a husband or a spouse, or a husband or a boyfriend, coming to the workplace to exact some kind of retribution. So without anonymous reporting, a lot of times we don't get to see those things. Similarly, in today's world, you see this on the news almost every night, when something happens, the media goes out and digs around in social media and shows that there were warning signs, sometimes very blatant warning signs, that something was going to occur. And every organization on this phone has the ability to monitor open source social media, and even dark web media. So it's important to do that because then you know what people are saying about your organization, what people in your organization are saying about each other, what the individuals who you are already monitoring are saying, and whether they're ramping up in a way. It's another piece of information that helps you develop this overall puzzle. And again, I think it's important to stress, we're not talking about breaking people's passwords or doing anything, that's untoward in any way. We're literally talking about open source information, stuff that's out there for the public to view. And you will be surprised, I promise you, you will be surprised by the amount of information that's available to you, and that will be very useful to you in helping your people, your students, your staff to be more healthy mentally and physically, so that they can never be put in a situation where they're facing another person who's hostile or where they feel the need to be hostile themselves. So the next thing you need, okay, so now you've got this information that's coming in from media monitoring, from anonymous reporting, you've got your people trained so they know what to report. That information needs to go somewhere. Unfortunately, one of the things that we've found in several of the crisis situations that we've responded to is that organizations, in fact, do have some centralized warehouse or place where they store this kind of information. The problem is they tend to store it chronologically. So a person, an employee or a student has a problem on a particular day. And a week or two later, they have another problem, and a week or two later, they have another problem. It never aggregates in a way that anyone sees it because it's on different pages of the storage medium. What we need to help you all do and understand is that a centralized information warehouse needs to be organized by individual so that the person and then subsequently people who review that information can start to see a picture developing. So when that information comes in, there needs to be an individual, a person we call an administrator on duty, who sees every piece of information as it comes in. That's important because some of that information that comes in could literally be of a critical nature. It could be someone reporting, hey, Johnny's bringing a gun into school. Now, it could also be a situation where now that we've trained them, someone reports, hey, Johnny used to be really outgoing. He used to sit with us at lunch. Now he's really quiet. He's sitting off in the corner. He looks like he's brooding. There's the way in which those two things get handled by the administrator on duty are very different, but both very important. So the administrator on duty needs to know, what do I do with the information that I receive? One of the things we've unfortunately also seen is that things have been logged into a warehouse or some type of recording system and then not reported or told to an appropriate group of individuals. The decision was made by whomever that administrator was that they felt in their own discretion they didn't need to do anything with that piece of information. Having a risk categorization matrix, knowing when to escalate something up the chain, either immediately to your behavioral assessment team, or in many cases what we see is the need to escalate it immediately to 911. That person needs to know, what are those things? What are the questions I ask to try and make that determination so that they do it right every time? So the next step beyond that is, again, I just mentioned the behavioral assessment team. You need to have a team of trained individuals. It needs to be a multidisciplinary team, not so as we've seen in some school situations, oftentimes it's the disciplinarians that are on the behavioral assessment team, or you'll have a disciplinarian like a vice principal and the mental health professional, whether it's a social worker or a psychologist for the school. And they're the ones trying to make these determinations on their own. That doesn't work. You need multidisciplinary. So in a corporate environment, very often, we'll put the head of security, we'll put the head of human resources, we'll put some managers. In schools, we'll very often have a coach, we'll have the SRO, we'll have people who view situations differently and therefore bring different skill sets to the table. Now, these people need a significant amount of training, because when you're training them about, one of the main things you're training them on is changes in behavior, not just the behaviors themselves, because sometimes, again, it's those changes in behavior. Harry going from having been gregarious and outgoing to being quiet and not participating. People need to know how to interpret those. So luckily for all of us, the University of Alabama took this on as the training of these behavioral assessment teams, and they have created a digital online training for the behavioral assessment teams. And that's going to be an important piece for all of you. Now, look, I know we've got some small organizations on this phone call or on this webinar. Your behavioral assessment team may really literally wind up being one person. I mean, if you only have 10 people in your organization, it may be you, the owner, who's got to deal with these things, but you need the training. You need to understand how to implement these pieces. And then the management system, you need to develop some kind of a program with all the forms, the processes, the procedures. Now, we have done that. Firestorm, as many of you know, developed a system called BERTHA, which is Behavioral Risk and Threat Assessment. And that system has everything from beginning to end as to what you do when you get these kind of reports. One of the things I want to stress is that share the formula is not attached to any organization. You don't, all of these things you can do on your own. We're happy to help you, and if you need, we're happy to, to have you as clients, but that is not required. What we need is for everyone to understand how the blocks fit together and that all the pieces are necessary. So the last and final piece that you see on this page is violent response. No matter how well we do at all the other things, a certain number of people are going to slip through the cracks. Now, some of them, unfortunately, we've responded to those situations with sociopaths where they intentionally slip through the cracks. So you've got to be able to respond no matter what. But those are few and far between. The vast majority of school and workplace violence incidents could be prevented through having a system like this in place. So Firestorm has broken down its services into two categories. Those things we call first look, which are the awareness training and the anonymous reporting, getting that first look where we can stop something from ever having occurred. And then there's last stand. You've got to have in place the ability to lock down, shelter in place, all of the different tools that you need to respond if someone is being violent. No one is suggesting that one takes the place of the other, but hopefully the vast majority of incidents can be handled on a first look basis. So I started out talking about awareness training. There is nothing more important than the eyes and the ears of your people. Almost invariably after any kind of an event in a workplace or in a school, someone says to us, "Oh yeah, I knew Johnny had a problem," or "Oh yeah, I knew that this was going on." And when you ask them, "Well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you do something?" "Well, I didn't know that I was supposed to. I didn't see that this was a big deal." We had a situation, this is a real situation in a school, where a young man was showing students a gun that he had recently purchased that was in the trunk of his car in the school parking lot. And unfortunately, this student utilized that for a very negative purpose about a week later. No one said anything because, again, they didn't understand the nature of the problem. So that education piece, that awareness training is really, really important. And once people understand that we're looking for subtle signs, that one obviously was overt. It was something that you could truly understand. But the other things are far more subtle, and the way in which people say things are far more subtle. And again, it requires that awareness training. All of you have probably seen recently, the Department of Homeland Security has done a big push on if you see something, say something. It's a great push. I agree with it 100%. I think it would be a lot more effective if they trained all of us on what it is we were looking for. Because to just say when you see something, say something is a little bit too broad for most people, including me, by the way. So when we talk about behaviors, again, I think the most important thing to understand about behaviors of concern is our behaviors that are changes in behavior. So, you look at some of these things, difficulty getting along with other, direct threats, injustice collectors, the people, everything's always being done to them. Well, you know what? If that's the kind of person that Johnny has always been, it's much less of an issue than if all of a sudden that's a new behavior. And so, again, people have to understand that and be trained to that before they're going to think it's okay to report it. You got to remember, one of the things we all grow up with and that we're all trained on from the time we're really small is the idea that we don't tattle. We're not going to go out and report somebody for something that we are not sure, what they did or what the outcome is. And that we need to make everybody understand there's a huge difference between reporting and tattling. And that reporting is something we do because we are responsible for each other and for ourselves and for our own personal safety as well as the safety of those around us. And again, everyone needs to understand that there's an anonymous methodology, because otherwise you're fighting that inherent problem where everybody just is resistive to the idea of tattling. So creating a new culture within your organization, within your school, within your corporation, that we are responsible for each other. That is what we're trying to do here. Anonymous reporting in today's world is a lot easier than it used to be. You know, it used to be that in an analog world, before we all went digital, it was very difficult to do something anonymously. Although, I will tell you, we do a lot of work, for example, in the children's summer camp area, where there are limitations on the technologies that are available. One of the things we've done in that environment is we have put in suggestion boxes where people could drop a piece of paper in that says almost anything. They can suggest things, they can recommend things, but they can also report things. And it's important that it be that way, because otherwise individuals will hesitate to drop something in the box, because if anyone sees them, they'll think that that means they're making a negative report. Now, interestingly, the place that that's been the most successful, and if you think about this, you probably know where putting those boxes would be most successful. It's in the bathrooms, the place where you have the most amount of privacy in most organizations, or, you know, whether it's a school, a camp, whatever it might be. So if that's something anyone is thinking about that works for their organization and you want to talk about that, don't hesitate to give me a call, because I can talk you through some of the issues and problems we've seen around using an analog type of device. Once you get into the digital environment, however, there are lots of programs out there that do phone-based text reporting, email reporting, phone reporting. Interestingly, the way that works from a texting or email perspective is it comes into a machine that assigns it an identifier and then sends it out the other side with only that identifier, and no way for the recipient to know where the information came from. So anonymous reporting is really an essential piece that every organization needs to have in place, and it's an essential part of an overall violence prevention system. You know, people are going to, there's always someone who knows. It's amazing when we go to, whether it's a school or a workplace violence incident, the number of people who tell us things, and you almost look at them like, why didn't you say something? But you don't ask them that question, because obviously you don't want to put people on the spot. But you know what the answer is. They just didn't want to be involved. They didn't think that particular incident was so important. What they didn't know, again, going back to the central repository, is that in the repository was a list of other things that that same individual had done or said. And when aggregated together, they became a much more important issue and a much clearer picture of what was going on. I talked a little bit before about media monitoring. You know, one of the things we always get when we talk to clients, tell us about how you monitor. And if they're monitoring at all, they've got in place things like Google searches. You know, we search for anything that has our name in it. That's, first of all, probably not adequate. And second of all, doesn't necessarily accomplish what you want it to accomplish, and may actually have a negative consequence. So there's a thing that we talk to people about called negative search engine optimization, where if there are searches being done which associate your organization with a term, whether that term be shooting or violence or whatever it might be, the crawlers from Google start to associate the terms together. And the next time someone Googles your company or your school looking for positive information, looking to find out who you are, they may very well get their first hit having something to do with your organization and violence. So how you set up your media monitoring, your social media monitoring, is a very important thing. And Karen Masulo, who you heard talking at the beginning of this webinar, is a true expert in this area. Do not hesitate to reach out to Karen and say, hey, we're either setting up a program or we'd like you to take a look at the program that we've got. But in today's world, with social media driving so much of what our youth, and now, you know, I say our youth, but of course our youth have become our employees. So our students that graduate from high school are either going into our universities, and the ones that graduate from our universities or our high schools are then going into our workforce. So we currently have a technology savvy workforce, and it's certainly a technology savvy student force. They are all using this information to talk about one another, to talk about our organizations, to talk about themselves. I mean, one of the main things in the school systems that these programs wind up getting used for is suicide prevention, because people self-report. So it's so important to be monitoring what's being done and said about your organization. All of these things, of course, work together to combine, to create an intelligence network for you. The media monitoring, the reports that you're getting from your people, all the different pieces, they come together and they give you a situational picture that's far more clear. Again, when you look at the individual fragmented pieces, a lot of times they don't tell you anything. But when you aggregate them together in the central repository, as we've talked about, which, you know, here you see it, the central information warehouse, it starts to become much more clear. So people ask all the time, what is this? What does this warehouse look like? And it's maybe unfair for us to even call it a warehouse, because in the smallest of organizations who don't have the technology to support it, it may be a 3-ring binder. It may be a 3-ring binder that's got every employee's name on it, you know, on a page, and you're just keeping notes, you know, and they're not necessarily notes, again, of anything negative. They're not the kind of things that are discoverable in a way that you're worried that they're going to affect you from a legal perspective. Now, let's be clear on that and be careful on that. There are certain student files and other things under FERPA and other things that need to be protected. That, again, going back to what Karen read at the beginning of this webinar about not giving legal advice, you definitely want to work with the lawyers for your school, for your organization, when you're setting up what you're going to store and how you're going to store it. But again, you don't have to reinvent these wheels. These wheels have already all been dealt with by many organizations. You know, having a protected Excel spreadsheet that your behavioral assessment team can access so that they can see the information anytime they want to on their internet-enabled device, fabulous. But again, if it's as simple as the fact that you're doing it by hand in an analog way, you're still way ahead of where you are if you have nothing. You know, one of the things that Firestorm has done over the years for its clients is we've put together the tables, all the process, the procedure, all the forms that need to be signed, all the different kinds of things that you do when there's been some kind of an event or when you're tracking an individual. Again, you don't need our system. You don't need Bertha in your organization in order to make this happen. You need some type of a system. Can you build your own? Absolutely. Is whatever you're going to build better than having nothing? Absolutely. Will we be happy to talk to you about it and give you some suggestions and other things? Absolutely. So don't let this be the daunting piece. You know, a lot of times people get to a piece where they say, I can't do this, and therefore they throw out the whole process. Don't let that happen. We will help you, because the whole reason we created Share the Formula is because we want to share the formula. We want to get the word out there regardless of whether we're involved in any way beyond just giving you that information. So if we can help, let us know how we can help. Your administrator on duty, who is this person? Well, the reality is it's not one person. It's multiple people, because no one person is going to be available 24/7, 365. So there always has to be a handoff. And this person has to be trained. A lot of the time, the administrator on duty is someone who already has a lot of visibility and interaction with the students, the faculty, the staff, your employees. It can be a receptionist. It can be a human resource person. It's someone who has a feel for the organization, but it doesn't have to be a person of any particular level. Once they get the information, the report, they're trained. They know, what do I do with an anonymous report, a direct report, a social media report? Because what they've got is they've got a risk categorization matrix. They say, okay, this report came in. This is not the kind of thing that shows any kind of an imminent threat. I'm going to put this into the repository. Now, I put it into the warehouse. What happens with that? Well, in certain circumstances, what happens with that is it gets reviewed on a regular basis by the behavioral assessment team. Or there could be things in the risk categorization matrix that say, put it in the repository and immediately send out a message to the behavioral assessment team that you want it looked at now. Or it could be, you need to dial 911 right now. And this person doesn't need to feel that they're making that decision on their own, because they've got the matrix in front of them. The matrix is helping them make those decisions. And as you can imagine, the matrix is skewed. It's always going to err on the side of more reporting than less. So if something comes in, there's never going to be a question, should I tell the behavioral assessment team about this now? So again, that's a very important piece of the puzzle, because otherwise those people feel trapped. One of the things you're going to do as part of your process when you're developing this system for your organization, you're going to think of all of the different events that could occur at your organization, the different types of vulnerabilities and threats that you face, and where they're going to come from, how they're going to be perpetrated. You know, can we be sure how we're going to handle those so that we know, are they guarded, are they elevated, are they severe, and what do we do in each of those situations? And you're going to do that now in peacetime, while you've got time to sit around and talk about it, while you've got time to do test exercises and training and all of those things, because that's what's going to make you respond well. It's also what's going to make your organization realize, hey, Johnny needs help. We need to get him the help now, whether you're doing it through an employee assistance organization, whether you're putting together a performance improvement plan for a student or a faculty member or an employee. All those things can be done where you're going to make that person feel the support that they need, so they never feel the need to act out or to be violent in the school or in the workplace. How you do that is, again, going back to that training for your behavioral assessment team. They need the training so that they know what to do with any situation. And they need to know, who are our outside resources? If we get in over our heads, if we've got questions, who do we go to 24/7, 365 to deal with these kind of issues? So having that team trained, having them know, how do we do a behavioral screening? How do we know whether this is a person who's ramping up? All of those kind of things are training that they're going to get. Having a case management system, like I was referring to, like Firestorm's Bertha system, having that in place so okay, we're a school. Anything we're going to do with a student, we're going to need the following sign-offs. Here's the actual pages with the signature lines for parents, for psychologists, for whomever is going to be necessary to get the approvals that we need to do what we need to do. We surely do not want to try to do that at the time that an event is occurring. We need all of this in place beforehand. That's that management system that I refer to. That having all of those plans, processes, and procedures, that's what Bertha does for our clients. That's what you can put in place for your organization. And again, some small organizations, it's going to be a very simple system. Some larger organizations, we do business with organizations that literally have hundreds of thousands of employees. In those situations, it's a much more complex system, and it's a system with much more checks and balances to it. And again, don't let it overwhelm you so that you say, you know what, I just can't do this. Yes, you can, and we will help you. We want you to get this out there. We want you to get the word out there. We want you, as parents, as I said, to get the word out there. As employees, we want you to get the word out there and say to your employer, to your school, what are we doing that's better than this? And if the answer is nothing, then why aren't we doing this? I'm not going to take the time to walk you through the entire process. That we could do a whole nother webinar just on how, we do the intake and the categorization and the screening. That's part of the training process for your behavioral assessment team, for everybody within your organization that's going to be dealing with these issues. But I think it's important to understand that there is a process. And when you can put things into a process and people are trained and they understand what to do, the level of anxiety around it drops dramatically. Similarly, being able to tell employees and families that you've done this makes them feel better about you as a school, about you as an employer, and it helps your brand and your reputation. And then, God forbid, the one thing that we all fear is that everything we've done doesn't work and we have to be able to respond. Well, in schools, we still have to be able to do lockdown, lockout, shelter in place. Everyone needs to know what their assignment is because, again, you're never going to stop everything. What we're trying to stop is the vast majority, but we still have to be able to respond. And having that last stand capability is going to be very important. We're going to try to make it a first look situation so that, and people ask us regularly, well, can you prove that you've ever stopped anything? Well, yes, in fact, we can prove that definitively because we've handled enough of them and we can give you examples, but it's hard to prove a negative. Can we prove that by getting Johnny the help that he needed, he never brought a gun to school? No, we can't because he never brought the gun to school. But we can also show you situations where our system has intervened, where there have been guns in the school that have been taken away from students before they had the opportunity to do anything with them. So the system works. And again, if you can review with your organization that what they're doing is better, great. And second of all, on that, I would love to hear about it because I'd love to understand what are they doing that we can improve our system with. But if they're not doing that, then we need to push them to say, okay, here it is. Here's the formula. Where and how do we get started? Because most of these things, especially things like awareness training, those are changes in culture. Those are not things that cost money. Those are things that cost time and a willingness to get them done. So that's the first step, I think, for anybody to do. With that, Karen, I'm going to turn the floor back over to you, but encourage everybody to go to either sharetheformula.com or Firestorm /formula. Anytime you can, hashtag share the formula so that you're getting other people to come to the site and to look at these things. We encourage you to do that. And I don't know, Karen, if you have any questions from anybody either.
Well, that's, first of all, thank you so much, Harry. And I'd like to tell everyone that all of the materials, the information, free PDFs and download are available at sharetheformula.com. We have a Twitter account, a Facebook account, a YouTube account. So just go out there and put Share the Formula in with a hashtag and you'll find us. Although I think there is also a hairdresser in Kansas that uses that when she does a good hair color.
Well, I don't know if you noticed in the first picture of me at the beginning of the presentation, but my hair color is getting a little gray on the sides.
So we're going to share the formula for that.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone for taking their time, especially Harry, especially at the start of the school year. It's always challenging for the businesses that joined us. Thank you so much. The main question we have received many times is when you are that one person who wears all the hats. Or if you have a very small organization with 3 or 4 people in an office and you still have disgruntled employees in your history, how do you protect yourselves? And so if you have that question, a similar question, Harry can respond to you personally. I'll forward those questions to him. For those of you that ask questions during the registration process, we'll forward those as well. You can visit us at firestorm.com. There's something in the top menu bar that says opt-in. You can opt in for our weekly newsletter and learn about what our upcoming events, webinars, other special surveys and studies are ongoing. We'd love to see you opt in and participate. Harry, thank you so much. Yes.
Karen, let me just make one 30-second comment on the question that you just asked about what do I do if I'm the one guy or if I'm the one lady that's got to deal with this. The one thing that everyone on this call can do, regardless of size of organization, is convince yourself that this can happen to you and to your organization. I don't care how big you are. And if you can convince yourself of that and understand that while you may think you know your employees, a lot of you, your employees have been with you for years or decades, things change in their life that you don't know about. So if you can understand that, then if you're a one leader shop, okay, then you got to get yourself trained. You've got to know, how do I recognize and deal with these things? And if you're a 100,000 person shop, similarly, you've got to put in place the plans, processes, and procedures to deal with it on that level.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you to everyone on the call for participating. Again, you can find out more information at firestorm.com or webinars at firestorm.com. We look forward to seeing you next month. We have a special guest from Ohio Northern University. Dr. Kathy Fleck and I are going to be talking about crisis communication and message mapping. So I look forward to seeing you then. Harry, my great thanks. Always a wonderful time when you join us. Thank you, everyone. This will end our session for today. Have a great day and goodbye.
Bye, Karen.
Bye.